Hello, my friend. Today I bring you another lost legend from the depths of Middle-earth. Close your eyes, feel the magic surround you. Our journey begins.
The Secret Magic of the Shire's Protection, a tale of Middle-earth in the style of J.R.R. Tolkien. Section 1, Shadowed Beginnings. In the days when the shadow of Dol Guldur lay long across the eastern lands, and the wise still debated in hushed voices whether the necromancer was indeed returned, there came a stirring in the deep places of the world that few marked and fewer still understood. The wind that blew from Ravanian carried more than the scent of dying leaves and coming winter. It bore whispers of an older darkness, one that had slumbered since the breaking of Thangorodrim and the drowning of Beleriand beneath the waves. In those days, the kingdoms of men grew weak and divided, their kings quarrelling over borders while greater perils gathered in the shadows. The ancient alliances forged in the fires of the last alliance had grown cold, and the oaths sworn by Gil-galad and Elendil seemed little more than words carved upon weathered stone. Yet still the Dunedain kept their watch in the wild places, though their numbers dwindled with each passing year, and their vigilance went unmarked by those they protected. The elves sang still in their hidden realms, but their songs grew ever more mournful, filled with longing for the grey havens and the white ships that would bear them into the west. In Rivendell, Elrond Half-Elven gazed often into the waters of his fountain, seeing visions of what was and what might yet be. The weight of centuries pressed upon his shoulders like a mantle of stone, and sometimes in the depths of night he heard the call of the sea, beckoning him to leave these fading shores forever. But it was in the green heart of Eriador, where the river Baranduin wound through meadows untouched by war or sorrow, that the darkness pressed most strangely. For here lay the Shire, that blessed land where time moved slowly and the seasons turned as they had since the world was young. The rolling hills and fertile valleys seemed to exist outside the great currents of history, a pocket of peace in a world growing ever more troubled. Gandalf the Grey stood upon the borders of this hidden realm, his weathered staff planted firm in the soft earth beside the boundary stone that marked where the king's lands ended and the Tain's began. Here, where the cobbled road from Bree dwindled to a cart track winding between hedgerows thick with blackberry and wild rose, he felt it most keenly, that subtle wrongness that made the very air taste of copper and ash, yet could not penetrate the invisible barrier that protected the Hobbit's domain. The wizard's grey eyes, deep as storm clouds and bright as starlight, surveyed the gentle landscape with the intensity of one who has seen the rising and falling of kingdoms. He had walked these paths for nigh on 400 years, watching over the small folk who dwelt here in their burrows and gardens. The hobbits who passed him on their way to market in Hobbiton paid him little mind, for wizards were not uncommon in their green land, though none save he himself knew the true purpose of his wandering. They saw only an old man in grey robes, perhaps a bit travel-worn, his pointed hat shadowing features that might have been carved from the roots of mountains. His beard was long and silver-white, his hands gnarled like ancient oak, yet there was a strength in him that spoke of powers older than the kingdoms of men. But the hobbits, blessed in their innocence, perceived only kindness in his weathered face, and perhaps a hint of the mischief that had made him famous for his fireworks. They could not see what he saw, the faint shimmer that lay like a veil over all the Shire, invisible as spider silk but strong as mithril, woven from hope and memory and the deep magic that flows in the veins of the earth. It was a protection older than the Shire itself, rooted in the very stones that Eru Ilúvatar had set in their places when the music of creation first rang out across the void. For the Shire was protected, though none who dwelt within its borders knew it, not by sword or spell as the great kingdoms were warded, but by something far older and more precious, the power of small things cherished, of seed time and harvest kept in their proper season, of stories told by firelight and songs sung for the simple joy of singing. It was the magic of contentment, of lives lived in harmony with the turning of the seasons and the wisdom of growing things. This protection was woven from the laughter of children playing in summer meadows, from the smoke that rose from 1,000 chimneys on winter evenings, from the careful tending of gardens and the patient brewing of ale. Every act of kindness strengthened it, Every moment of joy added another thread to its weaving. It was a magic that the Dark Lord, for all his cunning and malice, could not comprehend, for it was born not of dominion but of care, not of fear but of love freely given. Section 2. A whisper in the trees. The old forest stirred beyond its eastern borders, and in that stirring Gandalf heard the echo of words spoken long ago beneath the shadow of the two trees, when the world was young and the Eldar first walked beneath the stars. The ancient willows along the Withywindle bent and swayed, though no wind moved their branches, and their creaking voices carried tales that should have been forgotten with the fading of the elder days. The trees themselves seemed to lean inward, as if listening to secrets whispered in the depths of their heartwood. Their roots ran deep, deeper than memory, touching the very bones of the earth where the first songs were sung and the foundations of the world were laid. In the rustle of their leaves was the sound of ages passing, of kingdoms rising and falling like waves upon some distant shore. Old Man Willow, most ancient and malevolent of all the trees, stretched his gnarled branches toward the Withywindle's murky waters. His trunk was massive beyond measure, twisted into shapes that suggested faces caught in eternal anguish, and his roots spread like the tentacles of some vast sea beast. For countless years he had brooded beside the river, growing ever more bitter as the world changed around him, as the songs of his youth faded into memory and silence. But even Old Man Willow felt the change that was coming, the shadow that crept across the land like a slow tide. His malice, which had been content to trap unwary travellers in his ancient bark, now stirred with darker purpose. He whispered to his kindred trees of the old anger, of the time when all the world was forest and no axe had ever bitten into living wood. Tom Bombadil walked among them, his bright eyes troubled for perhaps the first time since the music began. He who was eldest and fatherless, who had seen the first sunrise and would see the last sunset, felt the tremor in the song like a discord in a perfect harmony. Where his feet touched the moss-covered earth, flowers bloomed out of season, defiant splashes of colour against the gathering gloom, as if the very ground sought to remember what joy had once been. His jacket was blue as summer sky, his boots were yellow as the morning sun, and his beard was brown as autumn leaves. But for all his merry appearance, there was something about Tom Bombadil that spoke of depths unfathomable, of powers that lay sleeping in the heart of all growing things. He was master of his own domain, and within the borders of the old forest his word was law. The trees are restless. Old Man Willow speaks of shadows in the deep places, said Tom to the listening wind, his voice carrying across the leagues to where Gandalf stood watchful. Something wakes that should not wake. Something calls that should not answer. The young ones in their holes and hedges know not what danger walks abroad, but the roots remember, oh yes, the roots remember all. In the depths of the old forest, where the trees grew thick and strange and the paths led ever deeper into shadow, the malice that had always dwelt there began to stir with new purpose. The willows whispered of darker counsels than their own, and even the Barrow Downs beyond felt the tremor of an awakening power. The wights that walked there in the small hours before dawn turned their hollow faces eastward, drawn by a summons they could not resist. The ancient burial mounds rose like green islands from the rolling grassland, each one the resting place of kings and princes whose names were forgotten even in song. Within those grassy hills lay treasures beyond counting, swords of dwarf make and elf-wrought mail, crowns of gold and circlets of silver. But the greatest treasure was knowledge itself, for the dead kings had taken their secrets with them into the darkness. Yet for all the growing darkness, the forest kept its ancient compact. No shadow that walked in the lands beyond could cross the borders of Tom Bombadil's domain, for his song was older than malice and his power, deeper than the roots of mountains. The very air within the forest sang with his presence, a melody that held back the tide of corruption that sought to flow westward from the dark places of the world. But he could not hold back the tide forever, and already the edges of his domain grew thin and uncertain. The trees at the border bent away from some unseen pressure, their leaves withering despite the green season. Even the flowers that bloomed at his passing seemed pale and fragile, as if the very earth were growing weary of the struggle against the encroaching dark. Section 3. The Lone Rider. Dawn found Gandalf upon the road to Bree, his grey robes dark with dew and his staff clicking against the ancient stones that had been laid in the days of Arna's glory. Shadowfax bore him swift as the wind, for the great horse sensed his master's urgency and ran with the speed of the Miaras, his hooves beating a rhythm like the drums of war upon the earth. The stallion's coat gleamed silver-white in the morning light, and his mane flowed like water behind him as he galloped through the mist-shrouded valleys. The wizard's mind was heavy with foreboding, for in the night he had felt the stirring of powers long thought dormant. Dreams had come to him unbidden, visions of vast armies moving in the darkness, of forges burning day and night in hidden places, of eyes that watched from every shadow. The Palantir of Orthanc had flickered with malevolent light, and though Saruman the White sat in his tower and spoke words of wisdom to the council, Gandalf felt the corruption that ate at his old friend's heart like a canker. The road beneath them was ancient beyond measure, worn smooth by the passage of countless feet. Here had walked the kings of Numenor in the days of their glory, when their ships sailed to every shore and their banners flew proud in foreign lands. Here too had passed the refugees from Gondor's civil wars, seeking sanctuary in the north when brother fought brother for the crown of Isildur. Every stone held memories, every mile was written with the blood of heroes and the tears of the innocent. As he rode, memories rose unbidden, of Valinor's light upon the shores of Middle-earth, when the two trees cast their radiance across the western sea, of Gil-galad's standard flying proud in the wind, the blue banner with its silver stars that had led the last alliance against the Shadow, of the host that gathered on the plains of Dagorlad, where elf and man stood together against the darkness. All of it seemed fragile now, a tapestry whose threads were pulling loose, threatened by powers that sought to unravel the very fabric of creation. The road wound through valleys where mist clung to the hollows, like the ghosts of forgotten armies. In these same valleys had Isildur ridden with his guard, fleeing north with the ring of power burning upon his finger like a coal of fire. It was here that hope had failed, here that victory had turned to ashes in the mouth. Gandalf could feel the weight of that failure still, a burden that pressed upon all the free peoples though they knew it not. The very air seemed thick with memory, heavy with the presence of all who had passed this way before. Sometimes when the wind shifted, the wizard thought he could hear the echo of ancient voices, the war cries of the Dunedain, the death songs of the Eldar, the lamentations of those who had lost everything to the darkness. It was as if the land itself remembered every step taken upon its surface, every drop of blood spilled in its defence. At the Forsaken Inn he paused to water Shadowfax and speak with the rangers who kept watch upon the roads. They were grim men, weather-beaten and silent, their cloaks the colour of shadow, and their swords worn smooth by long use. These were the descendants of the kings of Arna, though they no longer wore crowns or dwelt in palaces. Instead they walked the wild paths, guardians of a people who knew them not, protectors of a peace that was bought with their constant vigilance. They spoke in whispers of strange lights seen in the sky, and dark riders glimpsed at the edge of vision. Wolves howled in the night where no wolves should be, and ravens gathered in flocks so vast they darkened the sun. The very beasts of the wild seemed touched with madness, fleeing westward as if pursued by some terror beyond naming. Their captain, a stern-faced man named Halbarad, brought word that chilled the wizard's heart to its very core. His face was weathered as old leather, marked by years of hardship and loss, yet his eyes still burned with the fire of his noble lineage. In his bearing was the echo of ancient kings, though he claimed no throne and sought no crown. "Something walks in Rudor that should not walk," he said, his hand resting upon his sword hilt with the unconscious gesture of one long accustomed to danger. "The ruins of Fornos stir with unholy life, and we have lost 2 men who rode to investigate. Good men, Gandalf, tried and true, who had faced orcs and wolves without flinching." He paused, his face growing darker still. "They were found at dawn beside the old king's gate, their hair white as snow and their eyes empty of all light. Whatever they saw in that accursed place, it was not meant for mortal sight. The horses fled riderless across the downs, mad with terror, and we found them days later still trembling at the sound of wind in the grass." Section 4. Dol Guldur in the distance. Through the brown lands of Rovanion rode Gandalf, and ever eastward his path led him toward the shadow of Mirkwood. The great forest that had once been called Greenwood, the great stood like a wall of darkness against the sky, its canopy black as night even at noon. From its depths came no sound of bird or beast, only a silence that seemed to press upon the spirit like a weight of stone. Dol Guldur rose before him like a broken tooth against the grey sky, its towers twisted and black, with ancient malice. Once it had been a fair hill crowned with malin trees, but the necromancer had made it his dwelling, and his power had corrupted stone and timber, until nothing remained but ruin and shadow. Yet Gandalf knew that the hill was not empty, though the necromancer had withdrawn from it when the White Council had driven him forth. Something lingered there still, a presence that watched and waited with the patience of ages. The very air about the hill shimmered with heat haze, though the day was cool and the wizard felt the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Shadowfax snorted and stamped, unwilling to approach closer to that accursed place. The great horse had carried Gandalf through many perils, but here even his courage faltered, for the malice that dwelt in Dol Guldur was older than the horses of Rohan and stronger than their will to serve. "Peace, friend," murmured Gandalf, laying a gentle hand upon the horse's neck. "We need not climb that hill today, but only look upon it and remember, for what was done there once may be done again, and we must be ready when the shadow falls." From the ruined towers came a sound like laughter, cold and cruel as winter wind. The wizard's grip tightened upon his staff, and for a moment blue fire flickered about its head, but the laughter faded, and only silence remained, a silence more terrible than any sound. Section 5. Into the Black. When darkness fell, Gandalf left Shadowfax at the edge of the forest and climbed alone toward the ruins of Dol Guldur. The path was treacherous, broken by root and stone, and thorns tore at his grey robes as he ascended. The very air grew thick and foul, tainted with the memory of ancient evils. The great gates stood open, their iron hinges twisted into shapes that hurt the eye to look upon. Beyond lay courtyards choked with poisonous weeds and fountains that ran black with corruption. The towers that had once reached toward the sky now leaned drunkenly against one another, their stones blackened with soot and worse things. In the central keep, Gandalf found what he'd come to seek, the chamber where the necromancer had worked his will upon the world. The walls were covered with marks that seemed to writhe in the flickering light of his staff, symbols of power that no mortal hand should trace. The floor was stained with substances that made the wizard's stomach turn, and the air reeked of sulphur and decay. Yet it was not the physical corruption that dismayed him most, but the spiritual darkness that permeated every stone. This place had been made into a conduit for malice, a window through which the shadow could look upon the world and work its will. Though the necromancer had departed, that window remained open, and through it Gandalf felt the pressure of a vast and terrible intelligence. "I know you are there," he whispered to the darkness. "I know you watch and wait, but this time you shall not prevail, for there are powers in this world that you have not reckoned with. Small powers, perhaps, but truer than your own." The shadows gathered about him like living things, pressing close with whispers of despair and threats of doom. But Gandalf stood firm, his staff blazing with white light, and slowly the darkness retreated. For he was one of the Astari, sent from the Undying Lands to contest the shadow, and his power was not of this world. Section 6. The Captive King. In the deepest dungeon of Dol Guldur, Gandalf found what he had not expected, a prisoner chained with bonds of iron and sorcery. The figure was tall and noble despite his torment, with the bearing of one born to rule. His hair was white as snow and his face lined with suffering, but his eyes still burned with the fire of the Eldar. "Thrain's son of Thror," breathed Gandalf, recognizing the last king under the mountain. "How long have you languished here in the dark?" The dwarf raised his head with difficulty, his chains clanking like funeral bells. "Long and long, Grey Wanderer," he rasped, "since the day I left my people to seek the road to Erebor. The servants of the necromancer took me in the passes of Mirkwood, and here I have remained while the years turned to decades." Gandalf knelt beside the broken king and laid his hands upon the cruel bonds. The iron was inscribed with runes of binding that burned at his touch, but slowly his power worked upon them. "Your son Thorin lives," he said softly. "He dwells in the Blue Mountains with the remnant of your people, and dreams of the day when Erebor shall be reclaimed." "Dreams?" laughed Thrain bitterly. "What are dreams to one who has looked upon the Eye? It sees all, Gandalf Greyhaim. It knows of the plans you make in your hidden councils. Even now it prepares for war, gathering its servants from the dark places of the world. The wizard's face grew grave. "What have you told them?" "Nothing by choice," said Thrain, "but the necromancer has ways of drawing forth secrets that the will cannot guard. He knows of the 7 rings, and of the one that was made to rule them all. He knows that it lies hidden still, waiting to be found." A chill ran down Gandalf's spine, for he had long suspected that the simple gold ring found by the hobbit Bilbo was more than it seemed. If the enemy knew of its location, but no, surely the Shire's protection would hold. The ring had lain hidden there for decades, and its power slumbered still. With a final surge of the will, Gandalf broke the bonds that held the Dwarf King. Thrain fell forward, gasping, his limbs weak from long confinement. "Come," said the wizard, lifting him up. "We must away from this accursed place before its master returns." Section 7. The Necromancer's Voice. As they fled through the winding passages of Dol Guldur, a voice echoed from the depths, cold and terrible, filled with malice beyond measure. It spoke in the black speech, words that made the very stones tremble, and the air itself recoil. "Do you think to cheat me, grey fool?" the voice hissed. "Do you think your small mercy can undo what has been done? The dwarf has served his purpose, and now you shall serve yours." The passages filled with shadows that moved with purpose, reaching out with fingers of darkness to tear at the fugitives. Thrain stumbled and would have fallen, but Gandalf caught him up and bore him forward on feet swift with desperation. "I am Sauron the Great," the voice continued, growing stronger as they climbed toward the surface. "I am the shadow that falls upon all bright things, the ending that comes to all songs. Your little resistance is but a moment's delay in my victory." Gandalf did not answer with words, but his staff blazed forth with light so pure and bright that the shadows fled, shrieking back into the depths. The voice laughed, a sound like breaking glass and dying dreams, but it grew no closer. "Run then, Mithrandir," it called after them. "Run and tell your White Council what you have learned. Tell them that their time is ending and mine beginning. Tell them that I have not forgotten the insult of my defeat, and that my vengeance will be complete." They burst from the gates of Dol Guldur as the sun rose, and never had light seemed so precious to Gandalf as it did in that moment. Thrain collapsed upon the grass, weeping with relief, while the wizard stood guard with his staff ready. But no pursuit came from the ruined fortress, only silence and the memory of that terrible voice. Section 8. Fire in the Darkness. Within the walls of Dol Guldur, Gandalf turned to face the gathering shadows. The time for flight was past. Here he would make his stand. His staff blazed with white fire, pushing back the darkness that pressed in from every side like a living thing. "I am a servant of the secret fire," he declared, his voice ringing through the corrupt halls. "Wielder of the flame of Aenor, the dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun." The shadows recoiled as if struck, and from the depths came a roar of rage that shook the very foundations of the hill. But Gandalf stood firm, drawing upon powers that were older than Middle-earth itself. The light of his staff grew brighter still, revealing the true horror of what the necromancer had wrought in this place. The walls wept blood, and the floor was carpeted with bones of those who had perished in torment. Inscribed upon every surface were runes of power and dominion, binding spells that sought to trap the unwary and drain their strength. At the centre of it all stood an altar of black stone, upon which lay a palantir wreathed in shadow. Gandalf approached the seeing stone with caution, for he knew its power and its peril. Through such stones the Dark Lord spoke with his servants, and many had been snared by their treacherous visions. But knowledge was needed, and knowledge had its price. He laid his hand upon the palantir, and immediately his mind was assaulted by images of terror and despair. He saw vast armies, gathering in the east, orcs breeding in the pits of Isengard, the Nine Riders stirring in their tombs, and over it all presided a great eye, wreathed in flame and shadow, that turned its terrible gaze upon him. "So," said a voice like thunder, "the grey pilgrim comes at last to look upon his doom. Do you see now the futility of your efforts? Do you understand how small you are before my power?" Gandalf gritted his teeth and held firm, though the vision threatened to shatter his mind. "I see a coward who hides in shadows," he replied. "I see one who was defeated before and shall be defeated again." The eye blazed with fury, and the palantir grew burning hot beneath his touch. But Gandalf did not release it, drawing upon all his strength to hold fast. Through the stone he sent his own vision of the Shire green and peaceful, of the Eldar singing in Rivendell, of all the small lights that still burned bright in the gathering dark. With a cry of rage, Sauron broke the connection, and the palantir went dark. Gandalf staggered back, his hand smoking where it had touched the stone. But he had learned what he needed to know, and the price was worth paying. Section 9. Return to the Wise. The White Council met in secret in the halls of Rivendell, where the light of Erendil's star shone upon waters that had never known shadow. Elrond Half-Elven sat in the chair of lordship, his face grave with the burden of knowledge. Beside him sat Galadriel of Lothlorien, fairest of all the Eldar who remained in Middle-earth, her ring Nenya gleaming upon her finger. Saruman the White stood before them, his robes unstained and his staff unblemished, speaking words of wisdom and caution. "The necromancer is gone from Dol Guldur," he said in his voice like honey and gold. "What need have we to fear shadows when the substance has departed? Let us not be hasty in our counsels, nor quick to see peril where there may be none." But Gandalf looked upon his old friend and saw the corruption that ate at his heart like a worm in the apple. Saruman's words were fair, but his eyes were cold as winter steel, and his hands trembled with barely concealed desire for the power he'd forsaken. "The shadow has not departed," said Gandalf quietly. "It has only withdrawn to gather strength. Even now Sauron builds his armies in Mordor, and his servants walk abroad in forms both fair and foul. The time of hiding is past. He will move openly before long." Galadriel turned her deep gaze upon him, and in her eyes he saw the wisdom of ages and the sorrow of the Eldar. "What would you have us do, Mithrandir?" she asked. "The days of open war are not yet come, and the free peoples are unprepared for such a trial." "We must strengthen what defences we may," replied Gandalf. "The kingdoms of men must be warned, and the ancient alliances renewed, but most of all we must guard the small and defenceless, for in them lies our greatest hope." Saruman laughed, a sound like silver bells, with discord in their chiming. "Hope in hobbits and hill folk. You grow old, Gandalf, and your wits grow weak. What can such creatures do against the might of the enemy?" "More than you know," said Gandalf softly, "and more than he suspects. The shadow seeks to corrupt the great and mighty, but the small and humble oft escape his notice. In their very weakness lies their strength, for they cannot be tempted by power they do not desire." Section 10. Stirring the North. From Rivendell rode Gandalf north and east, seeking the scattered folk of Durin in their exile. Through the misty mountains he passed where the goblins of the Goblin Town watched from their tunnels, but dared not bar his way. The paths were treacherous and the weather foul, but the wizard pressed on with urgent purpose. In the Blue Mountains he found them at last, the remnant of a once proud people, reduced to working iron and coal in the cheerless halls of their exile. Thorin Oakenshield sat upon a throne of rough-hewn stone, his beard streaked with grey, and his eyes heavy with the weight of kingship without a kingdom. "Gandalf Greyhaim," said the Dwarf Lord, rising to greet his visitor, "it has been long since you walked these halls. What news do you bring from the wide world?" "News both dark and bright," replied the wizard. "Your father lives, Thorin son of Thrain, though sorely beset by his captivity. I have freed him from the dungeons of Dol Guldur, but his mind is clouded by the torments he has endured." Thorin's face paled, and his companions gathered about him with murmurs of amazement and grief. "Where is he?" asked the Dwarf King. "Why does he not come to his people?" "He wanders in the wild places seeking to heal the wounds of his spirit," said Gandalf gently. "But before he was taken, he spoke of a secret door to Erebor, and of a key that unlocks what was lost." From beneath his mail shirt, Thorin drew forth a key of silver and steel, worked with cunning runes. "This came to me from my grandfather Thror," he said. "With it came a map, but its secrets are hidden in moon letters that I cannot read." Gandalf took the map and held it up to the light of the fire. Slowly, words appeared upon the parchment, not in the common tongue, but in the ancient script of Dale. "Stand by the grey stone when the thrush knocks," he read aloud, "and the setting sun with the last light of Durin's day will shine upon the keyhole." The dwarves looked upon one another with wonder and growing hope. For 7 decades they had dreamed of reclaiming their mountain home, but the dragon, Smaug the Golden lay coiled about their treasure, terrible in his wrath and mighty in his cunning. "A dragon is not lightly conquered," said Balin the Old, wisest of Thorin's company. "What hope have we against such a foe?" "More than you know," replied Gandalf, his eyes twinkling with secret knowledge. "For dragons, like all creatures, have their weaknesses, and I know of one who has walked in the halls of Smaug and lived to tell the tale." Section 11. A Hobbit Remembered. In the green heart of the Shire, where the river water wound its lazy way through meadows bright with flowers, stood Bag End upon the hill. It was the finest hobbit hole in all of Hobbiton, with its round green door and brass knocker, its panelled walls and floors of polished wood. Here dwelt Bilbo Baggins, Esquire, a respectable hobbit of comfortable means and sedentary habits. On this particular morning, Bilbo sat upon his porch enjoying a second breakfast and the morning newspaper from Michel Delving. The affairs of the great world troubled him little. He was content with his garden and his books, his well-stocked pantry and his well-earned reputation for respectability. But as he sat smoking his pipe and reading of the latest crop yields and weather predictions, a shadow fell across his doorway. Looking up, he saw a tall figure in grey robes, with a pointed hat and a staff longer than his own considerable height. "Good morning," said Bilbo, though he was not entirely sure it was one. "What do you mean?" asked the wizard. "Do you wish me a good morning, or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not, or that you feel good this morning, or that it is a morning to be good on?" Bilbo blinked in confusion, then rallied his wits. "All of them at once," he said firmly. "And a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry, we have all the day before us." The wizard smiled, and suddenly he seemed less imposing and more grandfatherly. "I have indeed," he said, producing a pipe carved with curious designs. "I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me." "Gandalf, Gandalf," cried Bilbo in surprise. "Not the wandering wizard who used to come to the old Took's parties, the one who made such particularly excellent fireworks. Dear me, not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures." "The very same," said Gandalf, settling himself upon the bench beside the hobbit hole's round door. "And I think you might be just the fellow I'm looking for." Bilbo's comfortable world suddenly seemed less secure, and he found himself remembering tales told by his grand-uncle the Old Took, stories of dragons and treasure, of knights and wizards and things best left undisturbed. "I should think not," he said quickly. "I am quite content here, thank you very much. Adventure, nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things that make you late for dinner." But Gandalf merely smiled and drew upon his pipe, sending smoke rings dancing through the morning air. In those rings, Bilbo fancied he could see distant mountains and deep forests, golden treasure and starlit skies. For a moment, just a moment, his respectable hobbit heart stirred with something like longing. Section 12. The plan set in motion. That evening, as the sun set behind the hill and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, there came a knock upon Bilbo's door. He opened it to find a dwarf upon his doorstep, not just any dwarf, but one dressed in a hood and cloak of midnight blue, with a silver belt and a long white beard. "Dwalin at your service," said the dwarf with a bow. Before Bilbo could respond, another knock came. This time it was a dwarf in a red hood, younger than the first but no less impressive. "Balin at your service," he said, and swept past Bilbo into the hallway. More dwarves followed. Fili and Kili, Dorian, Nori and Ori, Oin and Gloin, Beaver and Bofer and Bomber. 13 in all, they filled Bilbo's dining room and made short work of his larder. Last of all came Thorin Oakenshield himself, noble and stern, with the bearing of a king in exile. "So this is the burglar," said Thorin, looking Bilbo up and down with evident scepticism. "He looks more like a grocer than a housebreaker. Are you sure he is the right man for the job, Gandalf?" The wizard's eyes twinkled dangerously. "There is more to him than meets the eye," he said, "as there is to all of us. He has the blood of the Tooks in his veins, and they say that long ago one of his ancestors took a fairy wife. That explains the odd disappearances of the Tooks, and their talent for unexpected behaviour." Bilbo spluttered indignantly, but Thorin was studying him with new interest. "Very well," said the Dwarf King at last. "If you vouch for him, wizard, I am willing to give him a chance, but the terms must be clearly stated." From his pack, Thorin drew forth a contract written in the formal language of Dale, with clauses covering everything from funeral arrangements to the burglar's share of the treasure. Bilbo read it with growing alarm, particularly the parts about being torn a limb from limb and incineration. "Incineration?" he squeaked. "We face a dragon," said Thorin grimly. "Smaug the mighty, Smaug the impenetrable, Smaug the unassailable. The king under the mountain lies dead in his halls, and our treasure is scattered like seeds upon the wind. But with stealth and cunning, what force cannot accomplish, guile might achieve." Despite his fears, Bilbo found himself strangely stirred by the Dwarf King's words. The comfortable hobbit hole suddenly seemed small and confining, and beyond its walls he could almost hear the call of distant adventure. Before he quite knew what he was doing, he had signed his name to the contract in a firm hand. Section 13. The Fire Awakens. Far to the north and east, beneath the roots of the mountain, Smaug the Golden stirred in his sleep. The great dragon lay coiled about his hoard like a cat upon a cushion, his scales gleaming red and gold in the light of the fires that burned within the earth. For 60 years he had slumbered thus, dreaming dragon dreams of conquest and flame. But now something had disturbed his rest. A whisper in the deep places, a tremor in the stone, a scent upon the wind that spoke of change and challenge. The dragon's great eye opened, burning like a star in the darkness, and his serpentine head rose from the piles of gold and gems. "What is this?" he rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. "Who dares to wake the mighty Smaug? Who speaks my name in the halls of men and schemes against my treasure?" The dragon's senses were keen beyond mortal understanding, attuned to the very pulse of the mountain's heart. He could feel the approach of danger like a storm upon the horizon, could taste the bitter flavour of dwarvish hope and wizard's cunning upon the air. With a roar that shook the foundations of Erebor, Smaug rose from his bed of gold and stretched his mighty wings. They spanned the width of the great chamber, casting shadows like the wings of death itself. Fire kindled in his throat, and his claws scraped furrows in the stone floor as he paced. "Let them come," he hissed, his eyes burning with malevolent glee. "Let the dwarves and their allies seek to reclaim what is mine by right of conquest. They will find that the fire of Smaug burns hotter than any forge, and that my armour is harder than the shields of kings." In the ruins of Dale, the wind carried the dragon's roar across the desolation, and the few birds that nested in the broken stones took flight in terror. The very air seemed to shimmer with heat, though winter was coming to the north and snow lay deep upon the distant peaks. Far away in the Shire, Bilbo Baggins paused in his packing and felt a shiver run down his spine. For a moment he wondered if he was making a terrible mistake, if his comfortable burrow was not worth all the treasure in the mountain. But then he thought of Gandalf's words and the fire that had kindled in Thorin's eyes, and he tied up his bundle with renewed determination. The wheel of fate was turning, and neither dragonfire nor the wisdom of ages could stop what had been set in motion. Section 14. A Blade Not Yet Drawn. In the dark fortress of Barad-dûr, where the flames of Mount Doom cast their lurid light upon walls of black iron, the Dark Lord sat upon his throne and brooded. His physical form was still gathering strength, fed by the malice and despair that flowed to him from across the wide world, but his spirit was mighty and his will indomitable. Through the palantir of Orthanc he spoke with his servant Saruman, whose voice had grown honeyed with corruption, and whose wisdom had turned to cunning. "The wizard meddles still," hissed Sauron. "He seeks to rouse the North against us, to kindle hope in the hearts of the hopeless." "Let him," replied Saruman smoothly. "What can dwarves and dragons accomplish save to weaken one another? When Smaug is roused to wrath, he will scourge the lands about Erebor, and when he is done, we shall claim what remains." But Sauron's eye turned south and west, to where a certain golden ring lay hidden in the depths of a hobbit hole. He could feel its presence like a canker in his mind, calling to him across the leagues with a voice of fire and dominion. Soon, very soon, he would reclaim what was his by right, and then all the world would bow before his power. "The Nine are stirring," he said. "When the time comes, they will ride forth and claim the ring. But for now, let them sleep in their barrows and dream of the hunt to come." In the Barrow Downs, the Nazgûl stirred in their tombs of stone and iron. They had been kings once, proud rulers of the kingdoms of men, but the Nine Rings had corrupted them utterly. Now they were neither living nor dead, but something worse, slaves to the will of the Dark Lord, bound by chains of sorcery that could not be broken. Their horses snorted and stamped in the darkness. Fell beasts bred in the pits of Mordor for speed and endurance. Soon they would ride again, and the very air would grow cold at their passing. But not yet, not until their master gave the word. In Minas Tirith, Denethor the steward sat in his high tower and gazed into the palantir of Minas Anor. The visions it showed him were grim, armies gathering in the east, the corsairs of Umbar preparing their black ships, the kingdoms of the south falling under the shadow's sway. The old alliances fail, he murmured to himself. Rohan grows weak, and Gondor stands alone. What hope have we against such a foe? But still he did not despair, for the blood of Númenor ran in his veins, and he remembered the oath sworn by his fathers. Whatever the cost, Gondor would stand, a light in the darkness and a refuge for the free. Section 15. The Kingdom Reclaimed. When the dragon fell at last beneath the mountain, his death cry echoed across the north like the breaking of a great bell. The people of Laketown heard it, and trembled, not knowing whether to rejoice or despair. For Smaug the Terrible was dead, but with his passing came the end of an age, and none could say what would follow. In the halls of Erebor, Thorin Oakenshield stood among the gold and gems of his ancestors, but the treasure brought him no joy. The dragon sickness was upon him, the curse that comes to those who gaze too long upon hoarded wealth. His eyes gleamed with a feverish light, and his voice had grown harsh with suspicion and greed. "The treasure is mine by right," he declared to his companions, who watched with growing unease. "I am the king under the mountain, and all that Smaug claimed belongs to me and my people. Let no one dare to dispute my claim." But even as the dwarves celebrated their victory, shadows gathered upon the horizon. The goblins of the misty mountains marched in great hosts, drawn by the scent of blood and gold. Their drums beat like thunder across the wasteland, and their banners fluttered black against the grey sky. Bolg the Terrible led them, son of Azog the Defiler, whose hatred of the line of Durin burned like poison in his veins. Behind him came wargs and trolls, bats and fell creatures from the deep places of the world. They sought not merely treasure but revenge for ancient wrongs, and their coming was like a tide of darkness sweeping across the land. From the south came the men of Laketown, driven from their burning city by the dragon's wrath. Their faces were grim with loss, but their hearts were brave still. Bard the bowman led them, he who had pierced the dragon's heart with the black arrow, and beside him walked the master of the town with those few who had escaped the flames. The elves of the woodland realm came from the west, their armour gleaming silver in the wan sunlight. Thranduil their king rode at their head, proud and fair as the morning star, but his face was troubled with foreboding. He had seen the armies of the enemy gathering, and he knew that this battle would be but the first of many. When dawn came grey and cold, the three armies stood arrayed upon the fields before the mountain. Dwarf-faced elf and elf-faced man, while overhead the ravens circled like harbingers of doom. It seemed that brother would fight brother, while the true enemy watched from afar and laughed at their folly. But in that dark hour, when hope seemed lost and the free peoples stood divided, there came an unexpected salvation. Eagles soared down from their eyries in the peaks, great birds with eyes like fire and wings that could bear away the storm itself. Behind them rode Gandalf the Grey upon Shadowfax, his staff blazing with white light. "The goblins come," he cried. "Look to the north." Section 16. A ring still sleeps. In the aftermath of the Battle of Five Armies, when the dead were counted and the wounded tended, Gandalf walked alone among the cairns that marked the resting places of the fallen. Thorin lay beneath a mound of stone, the Arkenstone upon his breast and Orcrist at his side, while above him the wind sang a lament for kings. The wizard's heart was heavy with sorrow, but also with a growing unease that he could not name. Something was amiss in the world, a wrongness that went deeper than the grief of battle or the corruption of dragon gold. In the quiet moments between one crisis and the next, he felt it like a shadow at the edge of vision. Bilbo found him there as the sun set behind the mountain, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The hobbit looked older than his years, worn by adventures he'd never sought and choices he had never wanted to make. In his pocket, his hand closed about a simple golden ring, his precious, as he had come to think of it. "I'm going home, Gandalf," said Bilbo quietly. "Back to Bag End and my books and my garden. I've had quite enough of adventures for one lifetime." The wizard turned to regard him with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of ages. "And the ring?" he asked softly. "The one you found in the goblin tunnels?" Bilbo's hand tightened protectively about the golden band. "What ring?" he said too quickly. "Oh, that old thing. Just a bit of magic. Nothing important. Helps one avoid unwanted visitors, you know." Gandalf's gaze sharpened, and for a moment Bilbo felt as though the wizard could see right through him, could read the thoughts that raced through his mind like startled rabbits. But then the moment passed, and Gandalf merely nodded. "Indeed," he said mildly. "Well, keep it safe, my dear fellow, and remember, if you ever have need of a wizard's counsel, you know where to find me." As they spoke, neither hobbit nor wizard noticed the great eye that turned its attention westward, searching, always searching for what had been lost. In the depths of Mount Doom, the fires burned higher as their master's anger grew. The ring was out there somewhere, calling to him across the dark, but its voice was muffled and strange, hidden by powers he did not understand. In the Shire, the seasons turned as they always had, and the hobbits went about their business of planting and harvesting, brewing and baking, gossiping and celebrating. They knew nothing of the great events in the north, caring little for the affairs of kings and dragons. Their world was small and comfortable, bounded by hedgerows and hobbit holes, and they were content to keep it so. But beneath the hill at Bag End, in the depths of a round green door, a golden ring lay hidden in the darkness. It seemed such a small thing, unremarkable save for the faint letters that appeared upon its surface when heated in the fire. Yet within that simple band was bound the fate of all Middle-earth, sleeping still but stirring slowly, like a dragon in its hoard. Section 17. The enemy withdraws. When news came to Dol Guldur of the dragon's death and the battle that followed, the shadows that dwelt there stirred with new purpose. The necromancer's servants whispered together in the darkness, their voices like the rustling of dead leaves. The time of hiding was ending. Soon their master would reveal himself openly and claim dominion over all the world. But Gandalf had not been idle in the years since his escape from the fortress. The White Council gathered once more in Rivendell, and this time even Saruman could not deny the growing threat. With reluctance born of pride rather than wisdom, he agreed to join his power to theirs in one final assault upon the necromancer's stronghold. They came in the hour before dawn, when the mists hung thick about the hill, and the very air seemed to weep with malice. Galadriel led them, her ring Nenya blazing upon her finger like a star brought down from heaven. Beside her walked Elrond, bearing Vilya the mightiest of the three, while Gandalf held Narya high, the red ring that kindled hope in the hearts of the hopeless. The assault was swift and terrible. Light clashed with darkness upon the summit of Dol Guldur, and the very stones cried out in anguish. The necromancer's servants fled shrieking before the power of the three rings, but their master was not there to face the council's wrath. "He is gone," said Saruman, his voice carefully neutral. "Fled east to his ancient fortress, no doubt. We have driven him from this stronghold, but not destroyed him." Gandalf looked upon the ruined towers with troubled eyes. "This was too easy," he murmured. "Sauron does not flee from battle unless it serves his purpose. What game does he play?" But the others were already departing, satisfied with their victory over the shadow. Only Galadriel lingered, her gaze fixed upon the western sky where the first stars were beginning to shine. "The ring moves," she said softly. "After long years of hiding, it stirs at last. The hour of choice approaches when all that has been built may be unmade." Far to the east, in the land of shadow, Barad-dûr rose again from its foundations. The dark tower climbed toward the sky like a black spear thrust at the heart of heaven, while around its base the fires of Mount Doom painted the clouds in shades of blood and flame. Sauron took shape once more, no longer hiding behind the guise of the necromancer. His form was terrible to behold, a shadow wrapped in flame, with eyes like burning coals and a presence that made the very air recoil. Upon his hand gleamed the great ring of power, but it was empty now, a vessel waiting to be filled. "Let them celebrate their petty victory," he said, his voice like the grinding of millstones. "They have driven me from my kennel, but they have not broken my power. Soon the Nine will ride, and the ring will come home at last." Section 18. Hope in ashes. Years passed, and the affairs of the great world seemed far from the green borders of the Shire. Bilbo aged gracefully in his hobbit hole, writing his memoirs and entertaining the occasional visitor with tales of his adventure. The ring remained hidden in his strongbox, forgotten by all save himself and the wizard who sometimes came calling. But Gandalf watched and waited, for he had begun to suspect the truth of what Bilbo had found in the goblin tunnels. The pieces of an ancient puzzle were falling into place. The ring's invisibility, its strange preservation of the bearer's youth, the way it seemed to call to its owner with a voice like honey and poison mixed. On a spring morning when the lilacs bloomed purple in Bilbo's garden, the wizard came to Bag End with questions that had been long in the asking. They sat together in the study, surrounded by books and maps, while outside the world went about its business in blissful ignorance of the storm that was gathering. "The ring, Bilbo," said Gandalf quietly. "I must know more about it. Where exactly did you find it, and how did it come to you?" The hobbit's face grew troubled, and his hand moved instinctively to his pocket. "I told you," he said. "I found it in the tunnels, after I was separated from the dwarves. A riddle game with a creature called Gollum. Nasty, skulking thing. I won fairly." "And this Gollum," pressed Gandalf. "Tell me of him. How long had he possessed the ring?" Bilbo's eyes grew distant with memory. "Ages, I should think. He called it his precious. Spoke to it like a person. Said he'd had it for his birthday hundreds of years ago. Poor creature. The ring had twisted him into something hardly recognisable as once being like a hobbit." The wizard's face grew grave, for the pieces were coming together at last, forming a picture more terrible than he had dared imagine. If the ring was indeed what he suspected, then all their careful plans and patient waiting meant nothing. The enemy had been searching for his lost treasure for centuries, and now it lay within a day's ride of where they sat. "Bilbo," he said slowly, "I think your ring may be more dangerous than we knew. There are powers in this world that covet such things, and they will stop at nothing to reclaim them." But even as he spoke, the wizard felt a stirring in the east, a gathering of shadows that turned their attention westward. The hunt was beginning, and soon the Shire's long peace would be broken. Yet in that breaking might come salvation, for the ring-bearer was no mighty king or wizard drunk on power, but a simple hobbit who wanted nothing more than a quiet life and a well-tended garden. In the darkness of Mordor, the eye turned its gaze upon the distant green hills, and for the first time in an age, Sauron the Great knew fear. For he had reckoned upon the pride of men and the ambition of wizards, but he had not counted on the strength that lies in small things cherished and the power that flows from love freely given. The Shire slept on in innocence and peace, but its dreams were troubled now with shadows. The time of hiding was ending, and soon the hobbits would learn what the wide world held beyond their borders. But they would not face it alone, for they had guardians who watched over them with love and sacrifice, and in their very weakness lay a strength that even the Dark Lord could not overcome. The secret magic of the Shire's protection was not in walls or weapons, but in the hearts of those who called it home, and in the heart of one small hobbit who bore a burden he did not understand, walking paths he had never chosen toward a destiny that would shake the very foundations of the world. Thus ends this tale of the secret magic of the Shire's protection, told in the manner of the Red Book of Westmarch, for the memory of those who were and the hope of those yet to come.